Good evening. We are again back on this special session on Bengal Politics YouTube channel. For two consecutive Saturdays, we couldn't telecast, and due to several problems, and that was our fault. But certainly, we decided to come again with a bang, and here we are. Today's issue or subject is quite special. In 1972, when the 200th anniversary of Raja Rammohan Roy was being celebrated with pomp and splendor in Calcutta, there was a mammoth gathering at the Asiatic Society of India. There was a lecture. The lecture was cheered by none other than Dr. Satyendranath Bose, a globally acclaimed scientist, and the main speaker was Sri Somendranath Tagore, one of the best speakers in the history of Bengal, known for his magnificence, eloquence, and simplicity. Perhaps none could have imagined at the time that within the next 50 years, there would be accusations against Raja Rammohan Roy of hobnobbing with the British and having ulterior motives to dismantle the Vedic civilization and the Indic attitudes and etc. etc. To be very specific, all these accusations are coming up now these days. We do not know what makes the persons accused Raja Rammohan Roy like this, but certainly, being the natives of Bengal, and since we have learned him, we know, at least we have learned what is from the other stalwarts. The pioneer of the Bengal Renaissance of the 19th century can't be debunked in this manner. It must be stopped and protested. What's most unfortunate is that at this time the accusation is coming not from the lefts or the seculars, but from a section of the alleged Hindu nationalists who have found Raja Rammohan Roy in a different manner now. We would like to know, we would like to get deep into it, since at many places, at many sectors, all these accusations are reminding us of those Naxalite standpoints of the 1969 and the 70s, when iconoclasm became quite popular in Bengal. There was the heads of the statues of Vidyasagar, Rammohan, Rabindranath were severed. According to the Naxalites, they were not part of, they were, they were not the radical bourgeois, they were the reactionaries and the treasonous to the Indian context. But we do find that, as I do find, and our team will find in some relations between those judgments and say these accusations. And to discuss more on this, we have with us a very special guest. Of course, he is not new to us. He had visited our channel on a special occasion before. But since this is a very particular issue, we can't have any other one except him. He is none other than Sreejit Datta, the present assistant professor at the Karnataka University in Ahmedabad. And what I must say that his expertise on Raja Rammohan Roy is enviable. He has been with the Pond Literary Fest a few days back and has come back with lots of experiences I have learned from him. So we must get into the subject. Sreejit, welcome. Good evening to you.
Good evening, Onimitroda. Thank you so much for having me in your show once again. It feels great to be back here and discussing issues which are, very pertinent to the time that we are experiencing, that we are living. Although these times are quite difficult, especially for the Bengalis, and it's not very, ideologically or politically very shiny as people often try to portray it, even for an all India context. So I'm glad to be back in this YouTube channel of Bengal Volunteers, and I look forward to discussing Raja Rammohan Roy's issue with you here today.
So Sreejit, let me begin in a very somber tone. What the hell is this? How can people come to accuse Raja Rammohan Roy after so many years? as if we haven't learned nothing. And what's more striking is that the persons who were accusing Raja Rammohan Roy, have they ever gone through the primary sources that are written in Bengali? When I am going to discuss on research on the subject, I must get hold of the primary sources. And there are several primary sources on Raja Rammohan Roy in Bengali, that are contemporaries by his successors and everything. But how? What makes these accusations? I would like to know this from you. Let's begin the journey from here.
Right. Yes, Sonimitroda, thank you for the way you have put this question. I think, first of all, we should note that the lapse of time from uh, the Raja, uh, the Raja's own milieu, the time and the space in which the Raja was living, and during which he basically achieved his life's works, and the legacy of which we are enjoying as citizens of free India and as Bengalis, of course. Uh, and perhaps this long time, more than 200 years, 2 centuries that have passed between his times and ours, makes it easy for the present day Indian to feel a kind of complacency and forget the kind of situation, the kind of extremely challenging situation that an Indian in the early decades of the 19th century, 1800s, 1810s, 1820s, and the Raja passed away in early 1830s, 1833 to be precise. So it has become almost impossible for a common Indian, even if the person happens to be educated, and even if he or she has higher education, uh, even then, without actually being subject experts and delving into the archival material and the vast literature that exists, both from the Raja himself on multiple languages, Bengali, English, Sanskrit, most prominently, as well as from his contemporaries, the kind of correspondences through letters that he had with his native Indian as well as British and other European or even American friends. And obviously, the literature, the copious amounts of writings that have come by the scholarship that people had on the Raja's life and works. So, this situation in the early decades of the 21st century that we live in gives us, a common uh, higher educated Indian sense of complacency. And we kind of feel that the political and cultural conditions of our own times uh, must have been very similar to the times of Raja Ram Mohan Rai and his contemporaries, which is, a blunder. As an assumption, it is a blunder to make such a presumptuous uh, feeling about the historical conditions in which the Raja was functioning. Secondly, I would say that the way you have formulated today's discussion's title, Denigration of Raja Ram Mohan Rai, how unbearable it has become, I think there is an element of xenophobia. Let me say it very clearly. I'm not going to mince words. I think there is an element of xenophobia involved, uh, directed to the Bengali people from certain quarters. I wouldn't say that it's something that exists in people in general from the other provinces of India, but there are certain uh, you know writers and speakers, uh, podcasters, YouTubers, such sort of activists, mainly activists, not even scholars. Uh, Oftentimes people confuse these individuals and groups with scholars or scholarship, but the kind of work that these YouTubers, podcasters, or even writers of sensationalist or popular books, uh, despite uh, some marginally valuable work that they have produced, uh, they channelize their own insecurities, jealousies, and xenophobia towards people like Raja Rammohan Rai, Mahorshi Devendranath Tagore, Rajnarayan Boshu, and even Rabindranath Tagore. And I think you are aware, but many of our audience, members of the audience, might be surprised to know, uh, especially if they happen to be Bengali, that Swami Vivekananda, a person of the stature of Swami Vivekananda, who is supposedly held in very high esteem in the so-called nationalist camp in India, has not been spared from this sort of xenophobic attack from the kind of uh, groups and individuals, the vested interests that I just mentioned. So these are, I think, the two main sources of the denigrations, unbearable denigrations that we are presently observing, around the time of the 200 years of the Raja's birth. Chalo,
Thank you, sir. Well, when you were talking about xenophobia, it's quite fascinating. Well, I would like to make the audiences know that xenophobia, what is Sreejit talking about, is not new. Even on August 15, 1947, there was expressions of xenophobia when the export duties of the jute industry was cut off by the central government without any intimation. And from that time, the what should I say that ugly expression of regionalism again became quite prominent in India. And since we do know that nationalism and regionalism, two sides of the Indian socio-economic structure, to stand simultaneously, it must be stated in a stiff voice that for the last 70 years, there have been lots of glimpses of anti-Bengal regionalism that have been found in the academic sectors and social scenario. Well, if anyone asks me of the evidence, I would like to point to one thing is that the freight equalization policy of the 1956 that robbed the Eastern India of its economic prominence and of its industrial leverage in India, and the entire expenditure or concentration was went to the central, the south, and the northern India is quite enough to show the xenophobia was still present at the time. But Sujita, what we were talking about the xenophobia, do you think that there has not been equal Bengal response in protest, and that has been the main reason for the continuation of xenophobia? We have not been able to express our anguishes in the same manner. Do you think so? There has been not similar type of protests.
Yes, more than similar type of protests or paying people by their own coin. This sort of reactionary kind of responses, instead of such things, I think what we should have expected from Bengalis who love their country, Bengalis who love Bengal as well as India, who do not really differentiate between the two, and people who like to call themselves as nationalists, from the very point of view of securing an ideological space for nationalism, there should have been responses protesting and at the same time defending the honor and legacy of people like Raja Rammohan Rai, Mahorshi Devendranath Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore, or Swami Vivekananda. That has been largely missing, mainly from Bengalis, as you have rightly pointed out. the kind of scholarship that we have seen from venerable historians. Please note that I use the term venerable and not eminent historians, because that particular term, reminds us of the special coterie of historians who have been sort of critiqued and exposed by writers like Arun Shourie in his book Eminent Historians. So I would rather characterize uh, people like Dr. R.C. Mojumdar as venerable historians. So even if we go back to the kind of work that Dr. Mojumdar was doing, and he was mainly uh, active and producing his magnum opus, uh, the multi-volume series on the history and culture of the Indian people during the 1950s and 60s, we see that there is a kind of balanced approach to reading and interpreting the history of the times of Raja Ram Mohan Rai, especially towards the end of that series of books on Indian history, where Dr. Mojumdar talks about modern Indian history, and it is a quite interesting and, more than that, complex time. The complexities of the late 18th century and early 19th centuries, these are lost on our people, our contemporaries, people who live in the 21st century. Uh, and therefore, they sort of assume that the kind of uh, conditions in which people like Raja Ram Mohan Roy were advancing their political and cultural agendas would be the same as in 2023, okay, or maybe post 2014. But that is not the case at all. But going back to our discussion of the kind of response that we see, or rather the lack of response that we see from Bengalis when it comes to protecting and defending the legacies of rather nationalist Bengalis such as Raja Ram Mohan or uh, the Tagores. I think there has been also this detrimental effect of a new curriculum that came into effect with the 1977 government of the Left Front. And from there, we slowly lose touch with the national history that mainly fueled our national movement. And this had been theorized by our nationalist thinkers right at the beginning of the 20th century. So when we see the movement firstly initiated by Dawn Society's Acharya Satish Chandra Mukhopadhyay, the movement called National Education. And when we see that people, stalwarts such as Rabindranath Tagore and Sri Aurobindo, and later Binoy Kumar Sarkar, who was quite junior to them, these people, such men and women, are getting attracted to the movement of national education. We see that all of them unanimously agreeing on the necessity of creating or writing a national history. This we get to see in the speeches and essays, writings of Tagore and Sri Aurobindo in particular, repeatedly. It is coming up again and again through their speeches and essays, or their articles, editorials, whatever they were writing at the time in the dailies or weeklies or monthly magazines. Uh, and that national history writing project, which was to an extent taken up by sociologists like Professor Binoy Kumar Shankar, who was the first person to bring back focus on Dandaniti, a very important aspect of India's civilization and the Hindu civilization, I must emphasize, uh, where we have this sort of vague idea that India has always been a land of high flown philosophical ideas and escapist spiritual ideologies. That India has been a land only of moksha and dharma, and that nothing else existed in this Indian civilization or among the Hindu nation. That's a blatantly false perception. And when Professor Binoy Kumar Sarkar translated and commentated upon the Shukra Niti, a very important text of Dandaniti, or political and economic problems, and how ancient Hindus have thought about those problems. Uh, Professor Sarkar basically revealed to a new generation of nationalist Indians and scholars the importance of political and economic and strategic thinking among the ancient Hindus. So, from that class of scholarship, from that tradition of scholarship, we had come within just 60 or 50 years uh, to a situation where even great fountainheads of nationalism, such as Raja Rammohan Rai, such as Rabindranath Tagore, were shown as flag bearers of secular socialist agenda that the Nehruvian state was sort of trying to champion, and whose legacy was forwarded by the communists in the left front government in 1977 onwards in West Bengal specifically, which sort of decimated the national consciousness, which was so animated, which was so lively and so powerful, and not just as an idea, but in all sorts of medium, in visual culture, in musical culture, in poetry, in songs, in films. This nationalist spirit in Bengal, this Indian nationalist spirit in Bengal, which was dominated by a sort of genuine pride in being a legacy bearer of the Hindu nation and its civilization, its great civilization, which has all aspects of human life, of the human social animal, be it politics, be it economics, be it fine culture, high arts, and scientific uh, tendency to look at nature and finding out technological solutions to the problems through architecture and urban planning and all sorts of activities, medicine. So that entire consciousness of being nationally charged and bearing the legacy of our ancestors, of our great and noble ancestors, that was completely lost on consecutive generations in West Bengal among the Bengalis. And what we are looking at, this sort of lack of response, especially from Bengalis, when Bengali and Indian nationalist icons like Raja Ram Mohan Roy or Mahorshi Devendranath or Rabindranath are attacked, or even Swami Vivekananda when he is attacked. Uh, it is shameful, to say the least. It is shameful that Bengalis are not at the forefront of defending the legacy of such nationalist stalwarts who are born in our country, in Bengal, in our province, and who are to be regarded, who are to be counted as among the greatest sons of Mother India that she has produced in the entire span of this civilization. Only
What a nice interpretation. Thank you. Very, very good. Well, before I must say to the audience that today it's raining heavily in Calcutta. For that reason, now also it's raining heavily outside. There might be some technical disturbances for that. We are very sorry and we do beg your pardon. Now, what a beautiful speech and what a beautiful saying from Sreejit. What it has revealed that the persons who were accusing the pioneering figures of the Bengal Renaissance have done so The Marxist interpretations were not the original texts. That's the problem with them. And number two, many persons, a good number of persons, if compared to the first, and today know that the term Hindutva was coined by the person called Chandranath Bose in 1894. Well, the term Hindutva had been used before that, even in the 1870s and the 1880s, by Srishchandra VERITAS, Jogendra Vidyabhushan, Shashadottar Kochiramani, but the Hindutva book came through Chandranath Bose. But stop here. Chandranath Bose had been one of the brilliant admirers of the same Raja Rammohan Roy. And now, those persons who are talking of the Hindu nationalism, so let me take them to the formative years. In the 1867, that means within a decade of the downfall of the Sipahi mutiny, there was the Hindu Mela in Calcutta. It's regarded as a nucleus of the Hindu nationalist movement in the Indian subcontinent. Hindu Sabha was formed by Sir Pratul Chandra Chatterjee, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Lahore in 1882. That is regarded as the cocoon of the Hindu Muslim later on. Now, let's fix attention to the 1867 episode. The Hindu Mela was organized by a good number of Hindus, obviously, but the leadership was taken by the Brahmos, the Brahmo Samaj, who regarded them as the intellectual section of the Hindu society. And those persons included Devendranath Tagore, his sons Satyendranath Tagore, Dijendranath Tagore, Hemendranath Tagore, and also some people like Rajnarayan Bosu also belonged into the Brahmo Samaj. There was Mohan Bosu, Nabagopal Mitra, there was Priyanath Bose. Nabagopal Mitra was regarded as a national Nabagopal, since everything of his ideas, his national gymnasium, national circus, and everything was called the national Nabagopal. So if you go through the original tenets of the Hindu Mela in 1867 to 70, it had been cleared in the very simple sentence: unless the Hindus form a military society in the near future, it will be impossible for them to exist in this more and more conflicting world. This political and social sagacity had been shown by 1870, where all those persons who had regarded themselves as a brilliant admirers of the Bhaks, the same person called Raja Rammohan Roy. So it means, had not Raja Rammohan Roy's works and decisions and teachings contained such political sagacity, it would have been impossible for the successors to be grasped thus. If you want to go, did it really happen? Then I would suggest you to go through the English reports of Amritabajar Patrika at the time. I'm sorry, the Bengal reports. Amritabajar Patrika in those days used to be printed in Bengal. After the Vernacular Press Act, it suddenly changed into the English version. Okay? So here it is said that while they are narrating the Hindu Mela, it said that we are not interested in these mock fights. If it happens that one person is bleeding heavily in this akhara and another person is having a mark of a dagger on his left hand, and the police is dragging Nabagopal Babu out of the akhara, then we will understand, then we will realize that something substantial is being done. So it has been said by Amritabajar Patrika in 1854. So for all those people, the nationalists of the other parts of India, who, if they are watching the show or would watch the show anytime, please take it into mind, from 1867 to 1908, or 1870 to 1908, for this 38 years, there had been an uninhibited, unrestrained, unrestricted Hindu discourse that has never been matched by any part of the history, any part of the India in later years. The way the Hindu political sagacity was discussed, the way the manner in which the political theories were nurtured by the Hindus at the time for making a Hindu India or better India or a martial India has never been touched by the others. Now, if you look at the initial years of the Hindu Mahasabha till 1947, you would feel just embarrassed to find the number of the stalwarts at the time associated with the Hindu Mahasabha. Binoy Sarkar, which has already been stated by Sreejit, Ram, Ramananda Chatterjee, the legendary editor of the Modern Review and Prabhashi, there was the Upendranath Bandyopadhyay, the revolutionary, the Purin Biharibas, the founder of the Dhaka Revolution Committee. There several revolutions were there, and there were several stalwarts of the Bengal intelligentsia who considered themselves as the finest successors of one individual called Raja Rammohan Roy. Even in the 1940s versions of the Modern Review, you will find several essays on Raja Rammohan's economic ideas by Radha Kumar Mukhopadhyay, by Radha Kumar Mukherjee, by Jyotirndra Mohan Datta. And Jyotirndra Mohan Datta had been the first person in the global scenario who had written the first essay on Islamic zakat. Zakat happens to be one of the five pillars of Islam, and then zakat and Islamic Tithi. This essay was reprinted by the Oxford University's Economic Journal in 1938. The original version had been published in Modern Review in 1937 in Calcutta. Even the same Jyotirndra Mohan Datta was the first person to state the 1941 census was completely flawed. It was done by the leaders, stewarded by the British and supported by the Muslim League. And even when the partition was taking place, he again stated a report that how can the partition take place on a flawed census? All these persons consider themselves as the brilliant admirers and successors of Raja Rammohan Roy. So I would like to know from the audience, had there been Raja Brown Sahib on agent of the Unitarian Church, would it have been possible for him to maintain such a gallant influence even after a century of his death? If I'm not wrong, he died in the year 1829. And we are talking of 1947. That means even 118 years after, Raja Rammohan Roy was again being discussed in the Bengali intelligentsia. Well,
18,
I must
18,
admit that 1830.
1833 actually
Oh, 1833.
his year of death. Yes.
Okay, that was even after 115 years of his death, he was being discussed. I am not of insane to say that Bengali intelligentsia in 1940s is a what's to say that present Bengali intelligentsia can be matched to that. It cannot be. You cannot match the sun to its shadow. Okay, and we are not even its shadow. But what is most unfortunate is that the nationalists who are trying to paint Raja Monna in black colors have gone to the Marxist interpretations more than to the original text that have been discussed earlier. So, seeing all this, Sujit, I would like to know from you, but when we are seeing the early rise of the Hindu nationalism in the 1920s and 30s, when you are saying of Binoy Sarkar, the Hindu materialism, and now what we are seeing. So can we say whether this Hindu nationalism or Hindu traditionalism in the form of a nationalism? Can Hindu nationalism also emphasized on the need of religious reformist movements in the religion. Take for example the common dining, the opening of the temple to all sectors of the Hindu, complete abolition of untouchability, and many other pretexts. But what we are seeing now, to me, it seems that it is trying to bring back the dark past in a new manner under the bottle of Hindutva. How do you define this?
Yes, Anamitroda, I think you have put your finger on the right nerve here when you say that it is a retrograde movement, the current so-called Hindutva movement, which is, being touted as a sort of decolonial response. I think there are several problems with it. And, one of the major problems that can be detected right away is the dogged defense of birth-based caste, which is, it's unimaginable that, despite such glaring instances, even in our venerable shastras, of denouncing such stupid and counterintuitive interpretations of the institution of Varna and Jati, that one belongs to a particular Varna, and particularly about Varna, this sort of explanation or interpretation, which is retrograde, is forwarded by these reactionaries, that it is fixed by one's birth. And then all sorts of other problems that are associated with it, they come in its wake, like access to temple, or community dining, or dining together. All these kinds of, this can of worms can be opened if we are to go back to a kind of time, go back in time, and sort of start celebrating the same sort of quagmire from which people like Raja Rammohan had rescued us. You have mentioned the Raja's role in reforming. I would like to say that the Raja's attempts are even orthodox in comparison to, those who learned from him, those who looked up to him, and took courage, derived courage from his example, had taken this movement of reform forward much more than the Raja could do. Of course, he was constrained by several kinds of work. During his time, he was sorely alone in this sort of movement. We get to see that he had more opponents than friends. The only kind of friend that he had, who was also, in a way, his patron, was Prince Dwarkanath Tagore, uh, the father of Mahorshi Devendranath and grandfather of Rabindranath Tagore. Uh, and we get to know that in the Brahmo Samaj that the Raja had established, only Brahmins, that is to say, those who are born in Brahmin families to Brahmin parents, had the prerogative or the right to read, either read or listen to the Vedas being read by other Brahmins. And for that purpose, the Raja had, you know, actually invited Telugu Brahmins from faraway Andhra Pradesh, because the Bengali Brahmins over here in Bengal at that time, during the Raja's times, were so obsessed with, don't touch this, don't touch that, which later on Swami Vivekananda would rightly mock as don't touchism. Okay, instead of Hinduism, you guys are indulging in don't touchism. That's how he would, you know, strongly attack. Swami Vivekananda would strongly attack this attitude. So the Raja, being a product of his times, was constrained by this sort of lack of, what should I say, scholarly resources or shastric resources in the province of Bengal, and which is why he was forced to invite Brahmin Pandits, scholars, Vedic scholars, particularly from faraway Andhra Pradesh. But
So, Jitha, there's
he,
a, okay, sir. Okay, please go on.
yes,
No, please go on. I was going to say. Please go.
okay, sure. So even after that, he could not, break the barrier of allowing people who are born into other castes, who are regarded as, of inferior varnas compared to the Brahmin varna, uh, merely because of their birth. uh, these sort of people could not access the Vedas. They could not get to know the gems that our uh, highest Shastra contained in it. And finally, this barrier was broken by Maharishi Devendranath Tagore, actually, who had understood rightly the changed circumstances and the fast changing situation of the Indian society. He was quite uh, intuitively aware of the future that his son Rabindranath Tagore would, pick up later on. In 1904, Rabindranath would write an essay called Brahmon, which is included in his anthology of Bengali essays Bharat Borsho. You know, and there in the essay, Rabindranath would uh, go so far as to propose that the Bengalis should reinitiate all the people who are born into Brahmin families or Kayastha families or Vaidya families or even Vaishya or Vanik families. They should reinitiate the rituals associated with the Upanayana Samskara, okay, or the thread ceremony, the sacred thread, which is given to the young boy, the young child, at a certain age, to all the which is supposed to be given to all Hindu uh, children, so that they can become dvijas, so that they can be inducted into the noble calling of serving the society through their or according to their innate nature, the swadharma. So from Rammohan Rai to Maharishi Devendranath to Rabindranath, we get to see a complete arc, a continuous thread of development of this revolutionary thought, which can propose at a time when Bengali Brahmins or even the Kayasthas or Vaidyas or Vaishyas could not themselves perhaps conceive of such a situation where the sacred thread ceremony could be reinitiated by all the Hindus. So, why and how was it possible? I would say that it was possible because the Raja, despite being constrained by his times and the special conditions of his times, was able to push through the door, and he had opened a door which made possible uh, the subsequent decades of reform uh, by his uh, you know by his successors, both within the Brahmo Samaj and outside the Brahmo Samaj. I would also like to mention that the Brahmo Samaj and Raja Ram Mohan Roy or Maharishi Devendranath should be celebrated precisely because of this vanguard role that they played. You know, we do not have to be blind to the kind of orthodoxy even within the Brahmo Samaj that had crept in. The orthodoxy of being pure reformers, the orthodoxy of being pure in the sense of sticking to the sort of Brahmo rituals that became, uh, you know, uh, written in stone through the passage of time. In all movements, this happens, which is why by the time we come to Rabindranath's life, when Rabindranath is a mature man, we get to see him attracting all sorts of strange accusations from even Brahmos. The Brahmos are accusing Rabindranath as being extremely attracted to idolatry, and therefore he is described as a pseudo Brahmo, and he is basically an idolater. All these sorts of attacks Rabindranath would have, a person like Rabindranath would have to face at the hand of the new orthodoxy, the high priests of Brahmoism. So we must understand that all these movements and the individuals associated with these movements have a certain role to play in the history of India. And having played that role, they would create the ground for next generation or the next set of movements to creep in. I would go on to suggest, and I have written about this earlier, that without the Brahmo Samaj movement, the Brahmo movement taking place in Bengal and spreading its influence all over India, we could never have seen the Ramakrishna Vivekananda movement coming up in India, in the late 19th century and early 20th century. It would be impossible for a generation of Bengalis, enlightened Bengalis, who were highly educated in the English education system, through the English education system, to even conceive of the greatness and the truth that their uh, religion, Hinduism, contained in itself, if they had not sat at the feet of the uh, Thakur Sri Ramakrishna Dev of Dakshineshwar Kali Temple. So this historical condition, where a meeting could take place between the English educated, very skeptical Narendranath Datta and the epitome of the truth of Hindu religion, namely namely Sri Ramakrishna. This meeting itself could not have taken place. The kind of special historical situation that made this meeting and the possibilities that that meeting contained, uh, uh, that would not have been possible if we did not have Raja Rammohan Rai, Mahorshi Devendranath Tagore, Rajnarayan Boshu, and the entire Brahmo movement. So we have to give credit where it is due. And our response as Bengalis, as Indian nationalists, and as thinkers associated with, the Hindutva movement of Chandranath Boshu or even uh, Bankim Chandra, I would suggest we should be uh, protesting this denigration of Raja Rammohan Rai's rule, because if we deny him, then all the rest that followed from his actions, basically, from the opening of the doors that he was able to achieve, have to be denied, because history cannot be read in void. History is always contextual. It is rooted in its time, in the actions of the predecessors, of people who come before a particular incident. So that is why we have to consider this legacy of the Raja. I would like to mention one more point before I, go back to you, and I would like to listen to you, uh, what you think about this. You have mentioned Rajnarayan Bose and Nabagopal Mitra, and how they played a critical role with the patronage of Mahorshi Devendranath and the entire uh, Tagore family of Jodashankar. Uh, Even prior to the setting up or foundation of the Hindu Mela in 1867, there was a sort of semi-public meeting, uh, which was presided over by Mahorshi Devendranath, and in which the main speaker was Rajnarayan Bose. And that meeting was held in 1866 in Calcutta, where Rajnarayan Bose came up with a prospectus, uh, which he said
So,
would be meant for the Society for the Promotion of National Feeling among the educated natives of Bengal. Okay, that's how he called his prospectus, which he read out before, the gathering that had met together for this discussion. And this prospectus is a manifesto. It is a true manifesto for the nascent nationalist movement of the mid 19th century Bengal. In
But
that
Sujita,
manifesto, yes,
let me interrupt. I'm sorry. There is a question. I would like come to the manifesto later on. There is a very good
okay,
question from one listener. Is that according to
sure.
him, he asked the question: is it wrong to oppose Raja's theories on opposition to Vigraha Puja? And he's asking if the Raja Rammohan Roy had gone against effects of idolatry, is it wrong for him to oppose Raja Rammohan Roy?
I'm sorry, I'm not able to understand the question very clearly. Is the
Okay,
speaker or is the query about whether Raja Ram
no,
Mohan
no,
Roy's
what?
opposition to.
No, no, he is trying to say if he opposes Raja Rammohan Roy's opposition to Vigraha Puja, would it be wrong for him?
Okay, is it wrong for us practitioners to criticize Raja Ram Mohan Roy's Vigraha opposition to
Puja.
Vigraha Puja?
Uh,
So no, okay. So yeah, first of all, uh, we should be aware that the Raja was not particularly opposed to or critical of Vigraha Puja. What he was trying to achieve in his times was a simple political situation, uh, a space for the Hindus where they can claim equality in terms of the merit of their culture and of their religion, where they can be at par with the Christians as well as the Muslims. We should first be aware that, Onimitroda has mentioned Dotto's 1941 critique of the census, where he had basically shown how it was a fraud census and how a kind of demographic truth was being hidden by several religiously driven vested interests in the province of Bengal and in India overall. So, the fact that they are inspired by Raja Ram Mohan Rai is no wonder, because the person who happens to be the first writer, you know, of a systematic critique of Abrahamic religions, including both Christianity and Islam, is Raja Ram Mohan Rai. Raja Ram Mohan Rai's Farsi tract, which is known as Tuhfatil ul Muwahhidin, Tuhfat ul Muwahhidin, a gift to the worshippers of the one great God, is basically a very clever critique of Islam, the Islamic practice, where he showed uh, through his analysis of Islamic scriptures that the current practices of the Maulavis and of the even the legal practitioners in in Islam were basically against this uh, pure universal religion that the Raja was trying to uh, arrive at. And this universal religion, in the Raja's imagination and in his scholarly works, in his religious scholarship, I would say, uh, had the all encompassing vision that would embrace all kinds of people. If Hindus would want to worship uh, God in or according to their ideal, they will be able to uh, you know affiliate themselves with that religion. If Christians wanted to do that, they could affiliate themselves with that universal religion. And if Muslims wanted to worship God according to their ideals, then even they can affiliate to that universal vision or vision of universal religion that the Raja was trying to sort of forward. So therefore, he had to be very careful in terms of showing how Hinduism was philosophically and culturally at par with the Abrahamic religions, which were very, very aggressive in claiming a supremacist position at the time of the Raja, as they try to do even in our times. But that tendency has become diminished in Christianity. At least they are not so outspoken about their superiority in the Anglosphere. Uh, but in the times of the Raja, the Christian evangelists were extremely aggressive, and they were all the time bashing Hindus and their religion, trying to basically prove that it was an inferior religion and that the Hindus had no religion at all. What they had was fetishism, idolatry, and all sorts of superstitious beliefs and uh, regressive customs. So the Raja's project was to bring out the core of the Hindu religion, wherein he could claim equality with the other two aggressive world religions, and in which he was so successful that William Adam, who was an evangelist in his early career, got influenced by the Raja's vision of universal religion, and he left his earlier fold, you know, of being an evangelist missionary in Serampur, and joined the Raja's project. He became a Unitarian priest, which is why the evangelist missionaries in Serampur in particular became extremely angry with the Raja, so much so that they tried to drive him out of Serampur, and we get to see that the Raja had to basically shift to Calcutta at the end of that period. So it was a very strategic attempt by the Raja to highlight the core of the Hindu religion, the Vedantic core, where the philosophical heights of Hinduism could be highlighted through his translations of the Vedanta, his translations in Bengali as well as English of several Upanishads, and through that, the Raja was able to drive home the point, especially to the Christian evangelists, that uh, you are not superior to us in terms of culture and religion, at least. We have a religion which is ancient and which has very lofty and philosophically sound, coherent principles that cannot be refuted by either Christianity or Islam. So that's why his emphasis was on the core, and therefore he does not highlight the Vigraha Puja. But he was a tantric. He was initiated into Tantra by Hariharananda Tirtha Swami, who was an Avadhuta. And if you actually go through the scriptures that the Raja had chosen for the Brahmo Samaj, and even the kind of scriptures that Mahorshi Devendranath had continued with in his Adi Brahmo Samaj, you will see that many of those texts are basically Tantra texts, especially the Mahanirvana. So the question of the Raja in particular denigrating Murti Puja or image worship among Hindus, does not even occur. And he had, in fact, expressly uh, stated that one who is a Brahmo, who will be worshipping, the formless Brahman, the one, the absolute principle of the Vedanta, should not condemn those who would be worshipping images of various kinds among Hindus. So the question of his criticism or his denigration of image worship does not arise, in my opinion, especially because I have gone through his writings, and I would invite anybody who's who has access to Bengali as well as English to read his original works in depth, and I'm sure they would come to the same conclusions as I have. Animitrada, are you able to hear me?
Hello.
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 I think there is some problem with the internet connectivity. We have lost connection uh, from Animitrada's side.
Hello, Sreejit Babu, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I can hear you.
Yes, there are some questions from the audience. Would you like to address them? I think
Sure.
Onimitra's connection has got disrupted for a while. He will be coming shortly.
Yes, no problem. We can now engage with the questions from audience.
Okay, so I am displaying the question.
Please.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so this is a very interesting question that oftentimes people who denigrate Raja Rammohan Rai, they mention that in some correspondence, in some letter, the Raja had envisaged India to become a Christian nation. So this is basically, you know, what should I say? It's almost hilarious the way a particular old usage of the English language and the term Christian has been played upon, and that is being touted as the Raja's call to the British to convert the whole of India and the whole of the Hindu population into a Christian population. So, where the Raja was talking about this vision, he was basically trying to appeal to the British correspondent to whom he was writing, and he was talking about the Christian spirit and not the Christian religion. I have read that letter, and I am certain that this sort of interpretation, where the Raja is talking about a Christian spirit, uh, has been either mischievously or due to pure ignorance translated or interpreted as a call to convert Hindus en masse into Christianity. So it's really a very poor interpretation, and it can spring from either of the two sources. One being mischief. I hope it is not the case, but given the kind of prejudice and the kind of irrational, uh, you know, attitude that we have seen recently on social media, in particular, uh, there can be some play of mischief here. But apart from that, it's a very ignorant kind of interpretation of that sentence and of that single word, Christian. Raja was talking about the Christian spirit in which all should be embraced. Sometimes even the word Catholic is used. You know, Catholic basically means, apart from being the name of uh, the biggest denomination of the Christian religion, Catholic also means all embracing. Okay, and the Christian spirit that the Raja was alluding to in that letter, which he wrote to an English or British or English speaking correspondent, he was appealing to uh, their Christian spirit, in which they would be able to relate to the kind of vision that he is proposing, that India would, uh, you know, arrive at that core of the Hindu religion, and people would be harmoniously existing, and they will be on the path of progress, political, economic, as well as cultural, religious progress in a Christian spirit. So,
Well, Sujit, now I would like to say something that I'm very sorry since the line is falling down. My last question to you: it's true that many of us know, and perhaps lots, that Raja Raman Rai had a profound grip on the Tantra, and according to many Pandits, there are some lost years in his life where he had gone even to Tibet to learn Tantra. So, how is it possible to ask for us to assume that such a personality was against the Sanskrit education of teaching of Sanskrit in India? Is it true?
not at all. Despite there being some suspicions about the truth of his travel to Tibet, in Brojendranath Bandyopadhyay's book, Raja Rammohan Ray's Bengali biography that Brojendranath Bandyopadhyay has written, he has done extensive archival research, and also he has gone through the letters of the Raja in a very meticulous manner. Apart from the letters that were written about the Raja, which are available in the British archives and the National Archives in our country, he basically has come to the conclusion that uh, the the accounts that we get from the Raja's contemporaries, especially after the Raja's death, from people like Carpenter and from Colette, Sophia Dobson Colette. And these people have basically listened to some legends about the Raja from some of his admirers, one of whom happened to be Rajanarayan Bose's father. I think his name was Nandu Kishore Bose, if I'm not wrong. Uh, Nandu Kishore happened to be an ardent follower of the Raja, and sometimes in order to praise him in his overzealous uh, tendency to praise the Raja, he had spun some stories about him, some impossible stories. So, by researching into the archival materials and especially looking at the letters, uh, Rajendranath has come to the conclusion that perhaps it was near impossible for the Raja to travel to Tibet. But it is certain that at a very young age, I think almost as young as 14 years, the Raja came to know, he became familiar with somebody called Swami Hariharananda Tirtha,
Datta
who
Swami.
was an Avadhuta. Yes. So that person was, he happened to be a teacher, an adhyapaka, in the traditional tools or the traditional Sanskrit schools uh, in a neighboring village uh, where Raja lived, as a young boy. So he met the Raja for the first time when the Raja was just 14 years old, and he basically introduced the Raja to the Sanskrit Shastras. And it is perhaps from this contact that the Raja started to gain a hold in Sanskrit Shastras. And later on, when the Raja was uh, employed by John Digby, who was a member of the lower bureaucracy in the British company government, the government of the British East India Company. So during his stay in in the Rangpur district of undivided North Bengal, the Raja had again come into contact with this uh, teacher from his teenage days, Swami Hariharananda. And this time in Rangpur, Swami Hariharananda basically introduced the Raja to tantric practices. And it is through his influence that the Raja undertook a kind of uh, compilation of the shlokas or the verses which we find in Mahanirvana Tantra. He helped Swami Hariharananda edit and compile this text of Mahanirvana Tantra, and he was greatly influenced by this particular text. And if we look at the scriptural basis of the Brahmo sect, then we will be able to identify several shlokas, several verses uh, that exist as the scriptural basis of the Brahmo sect are actually taken from some of the ullasas or chapters of the Mahanirvana Tantra, which is sort of a burning proof of the fact that the core of Vedantic Hindu religion, which is an emphasis on the absolute or Brahman, is informed not just by the Upanishads and the Vedanta or Brahma Sutra, but also by uh, Tantra. And the Raja would privately practice, Tantra sadhana, but publicly he would only foreground or highlight those aspects of both Vedanta as well as Tantra which are uh, helpful in showing Hinduism as a religion at par with the Abrahamic religions and mainly at par with Christianity. So that is the Raja's affiliation with Tantra. He had steeped himself in tantric practices and he had borrowed heavily from tantric texts and mainly from the Mahanirvana Tantra in order to build the scriptural basis of the reformed Hinduism that he started preaching, which is the Brahmo sect.
That was Sujit, his aversion to Sanskrit education that is alleged that he was against Sanskrit education in India is complete misinformation and a false propaganda, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because without a sound knowledge of Sanskrit, he would first of all not be able to translate the Vedanta, Brahma Sutra as well as several Upanishads, and he translated them so that his countrymen, the Bengalis, and he also translated the Vedanta Grantha into Hindi, and somebody like the poet Hazari Prasad Dwivedi, who's a renowned
Mhm.
critic and literary critic and poet of the Hindi language from the 20th century, is on record saying that Raja Rammohan Roy happens to be among the first three makers of Hindi prose. So, in a way, the Raja had contributed to this building of the literary treasure of the Hindi language. Back then, it was known as Hindustani. It was not called Hindi at that time. But the Raja's translations of the Vedanta and the Upanishads into Hindi basically contributed to the building of the Hindi language and particularly its prose. So you can also see how he has no compunction in translating the core of the Hindu religion to those modern Indian languages which are spoken by millions and millions of Indians who were his contemporaries and who are still conversant in these two languages. Bengali and Hindi happen to be two of the biggest languages in terms of population who speak these languages, right? And the emphasis on Sanskrit knowledge is also visible very particularly in his opening of the Vedanta College. He started this institution where he would take help from his wealthy patrons and friends like Prince Dwarkanath to give scholarship to Bengali students who are in genuine need. And with the help of that scholarship, such Bengali students would be sent to places like Varanasi in order to become well versed in the Sanskrit Shastras. And they would come back here and they would then teach in the Vedanta College, where both the Sanskrit Shastras, especially the Vedanta as a philosophy, but also Vyakarana, being the backbone of the knowledge of Sanskrit language, were taught uh, alongside the English language and the sciences such as geometry, geography, uh, uh, natural sciences, physics, chemistry, as well as ancient Indian literature, as well as some of the contemporary English literature. So it is and it is so astounding when we get to hear that the Raja is against Sanskrit. What he was really against is the uh, misuse or misappropriation of uh, government resources to establishing the same kind of institutions which were already in existence. The Sanskrit College in Banaras was already there, and at Fort William College, there was a lot of emphasis on learning Sanskrit, and the government was also uh, uh, quite aloof from. I mean, British East India Company government was not at all desirous of disturbing the status quo of education, and especially the kind of Sanskrit traditional education as well as the Perso-Arabic traditional education that the Hindus and Muslims had, the kind of institutions that they used to run, the kind of subjects that were taught in those institutions. The British government at that time had no intention of disturbing that setup. Uh, but when there was a concerted effort from the evangelists in order to establish such institutions where only the supremacy of European civilization would be taught and only the supremacy of the Christian religion would be taught, then there became a problem. And this problem was actually anticipated by the Raja, who had gone on to establish schools where English and as a language and also European sciences, alongside Sanskrit language and the Hindu Shastras would be taught. So I do not see why, because the Raja had emphasized on the Indian students acquiring the new knowledge that was becoming more and more relevant in modern world. Why would that be interpreted as his opposition to Sanskrit? If he were opposed to Sanskrit, he would never have bothered so much of time in his almost short-lived life dedicated to translating the Sanskrit Shastras, various Sanskrit Shastras, not just one, not just Vedanta, but also all other kinds of Shastras, including grammar uh, that he would translate. He created the Bengali grammar, first sort of Bengali grammar in the image of Sanskrit grammar. Would that be possible if he were opposed to, the Sanskrit language? The kind of prose that he was writing in Bengali, that was almost a mirror image of the Sanskrit prose of, let's say, Varnabhatta or the commentators of the Sanskrit Shastras, such as Adi Shankaracharya. And mind you, whenever he mentions these commentators and the Shastrakaras, such as Adi Shankaracharya, he would be so venerable. His attitude towards these Shastrakaras is extremely venerable. So much so that he would always mention them as Bhagavan Bhashyapara or Bhagavan Shankaracharya, and so on and so forth. So where does the question of the Raja being opposed to Sanskrit arise? That's a foolish assumption, or probably a mischievous spin of narrative.
Wonderful, wonderful. What an eloquent speech from Sreejit. And I hope that all the questions that people are having prior to this session have been answered. But we do know very well, still, the accusations and the conspiracies against the great man would continue to disturb us. We must let, since we are on the verge of ending, I would like to, before I uh, express my regards to Sujita, I must say to the audience that when there is an onslaught against you and your identity, you must be ready to gear up. This is enough for two of us, since the discussions that have taken place here shall be recorded by many, shall be perceived by many, but it can be turned into a struggle only if you listen, if you gear up and ask the others to come up to the stage and resist the nonsenses. The pioneering figures of Bengal revolution were not only Bengalis, they had contributed their everything for the sake of India. I don't know what the problem is going on in this line.
No, no, we are able to clearly hear you,
I'm
Anumitra,
sorry,
and yeah,
just a minute, just a minute. There was a call in WhatsApp. I'm sorry. Just a minute, just a minute. The
you know,
pioneering, the
may,
pioneer,
may, may I please take that cue where you mentioned that as Bengalis we should be
okay.
defending people like Raja Rammohan Rai and even the revolutionary nationalists who are from Bengal. I think we should be defending them not just for the sake of the Bengali identity, but for the overall Indian nationalism and for
Of
Hindutva itself.
course, of
I
course,
mean,
of course, of
it
course.
is, it is so silly of people who come at us and say that the Bengalis are extremely touchy about subjects like Raja Ram Mohan Rai or Rabindranath Tagore, and that if there is any amount of criticism, even if it is just slight criticism of these individuals, then the Bengalis would be like, oh, they are unjustly attacking us and our icons. No, it is not Bengali icons that we are singularly bothered about. If you want to create a version of history which is exclusive of icons like Raja Ram Mohan Rai or Rabindranath Tagore or Sri Aurobindo or Swami Vivekananda or Chandranath Bose or Shashadhar Tarkachuramani, all these luminaries in the field of Indian nationalism and Hindutva, then I'm sorry to say that at the end of the day, what you will have is another version of Abrahamism and not Hindutva. And
Exactly, exactly.
you will be going back to the time of the dinosaurs and not moving forward into the future, which is you know which is extremely complex, and you are not going to be able to cope with the complexities of the future if you simply feel uncomfortable about the complexities of your past. The fact that the Raja was a Tantra sadhaka in his private life, and he was forwarding a sort of monistic religion in the form of the Brahmo sect, should be proof enough of the complexity in which he was operating, the political, cultural, and religious complexities. And we are still operating in similar situations. Of course, we have now more freedom. Now we are not afraid of speaking about and celebrating our religion, in all its aspects, and we have more freedom to uh, talk about the various sects and matas and panths of the Hindu religion. But at the time when the Raja was operating, when he was translating the Vedanta, he would be taken off from from his mere right to speak about the Hindu religion if he shows some kind of you know, uh, disrespect to a Christian scholar or a Christian administrator or a European administrator, essentially. So, uh, be mindful of the uh, complexities of history, and try to know your real history. The kind of uh, provincial, parochial narratives that we see coming from certain quarters, attacking Bengalis, uh, calling them all sorts of names, and especially denigrating us, trying to denigrate us by saying that we are parochial, we are provincial, and we are, Bengali chauvinists and whatnot. I think they basically expose their own chauvinism, their inability to cope with the complex history of Hindutva and of Indian nationalism. And they are simply uncomfortable with the fact that this huge revolution and this huge upsurge of Hindutva as well as Indian nationalism, there is hardly any difference between the two. If we look at the kind of writings that Sri Aurobindo would give us at the beginning of the 20th century, it would be more than clear that the two are more or less same. I mean, overall,
Sujita, there is a last question for you. What's of Maharaja Radhakant today?
what of Maharaja Radhakantadev? First of all, he is Raja Radhakantadev. So, Raja Radhakantadev was a kind of uh, adversary to Raja Rammohan Rai in the matter of social and religious reform. But when it came to establishing institutions where English education and European system of liberal education would be taught, the Raja had no difference with Raja Radhakantadev had no difference with Raja Rammohan Rai. They were in agreement, and we get to see the proof of that agreement and their cooperation, in fact, in the Calcutta School Book Society that was established in I think 1817, the same year when the Hindu College was established. In the core committee of the Calcutta School Book Society, uh, we see people like Mrityunjay Vidyalankar and Raja Radhakantadev. They are the sort of main figures who are managing the Calcutta School Book Society. And who is writing textbooks for school? Raja Rammohan Rai. He's writing a textbook on geometry. He's writing a textbook on geography. He's writing some books on history, which will be useful for school children. So you can see how particular and how clear-headed these Bengali nationalists and lovers of the Hindu religion were. All of them were lovers of the Hindu religion. They took special pride in describing themselves in Hindu, both Raja Rammohan Rai as well as people like Raja Radhakantadev and Mrityunjay Vidyalankar. But they had differences in the matters of gradations, the degrees to which social and religious reform should be permitted, of course. But whenever it comes to the progress, the material progress and the overall cultural progress of the Hindu nation and of India as a whole are concerned, there we won't see any difference between Raja Rammohan Rai and Raja Radhakant. They would be cooperating with each other, okay, forgetting all their differences. So that is what
And
we know about Raja Radhakant.
oh, and that type of sagacity is rarely found these days, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it is a shameful matter that we don't get to see a similar kind of bonhomie or a sense of cooperation between
Mm,
present day Indians and especially present day Hindus. And
mm,
that level of clear-headed thinking, that clarity of vision that both Raja Rammohan Roy as well as Raja Radhakantadev had, that English education and the European system of liberal education was of utmost importance, that it was really important to introduce those systems in the place of the traditional methods of education. Of course, knowledge of Sanskrit was emphasized. Hindu college had employed Sanskrit teachers. Hindu college had employed teachers who would teach Indian philosophy in the form of Vedanta, Sankhya, and Mimamsa and Yoga. Why would there be such subjects taught at Hindu college, or for example in the college that the Raja himself had established, Raja Rammohan Roy had established Vedanta College. Why would there be subjects like Sanskrit and you know Vedanta philosophy if they were opposed to Sanskrit?
And before I thank Sreejit, for the last time, I must add a few points only. Whether the even if the Indians like us do prefer to be in the controversies and debates, there's a second option to this historic truth that had there not been the introduction of the English language and the European school of thoughts in India, it would have been impossible for the Hindus by the 19th century to overcome the Muslims who have subjugated them for more than 7 centuries at a stretch. The Battle of Plassey ended the concept of jizya tax in Bengal. The following Durga Puja of Krishna Chandra Roy happened without paying a single penny as jizya, and it was after the crossing of 7 centuries from the time of Prithviraj Chauhan. The Hindus must remember this, number one. Okay, this is I just continue. And number two, had we not been taught the English language, the European Western education, we would have remained as a lackeys to the Muslim Nawabs or in their chillings on the top khanas and everywhere, because we Hindus at the time had no decent way to live in, to inhabit. It must be remembered. Now I must come to Sujita.
Just a small point I would like to quickly mention here, Onimitruda. You mentioned
Mm.
this very important aspect of how Maharaja Krishna Chandra Dev's Durga Puja was sort of done without any kind of taxation on it or any
Mm.
kind of inhibition or prohibition from the government side on the
Mm.
celebration of Durga Puja. We get to see this ability of the Hindu thinkers and the Hindu leaders, the leaders of the Hindu society at that time, that they were able to achieve a kind of fellowship with the British administrators, so that their practices and their political and economic interests would be safe. We see this also, in the way the British were taking an active interest in bringing out the great glory of ancient India and especially of the Hindu religion. Recently I was in the Pondilit Fest where I heard Dr. Meenakshi Jain speak on certain episodes of modern Indian history, and there Dr. Meenakshi Jain mentioned that Warren Hastings would take an active interest in the day-to-day puja happenings in Kalighat temple, and he would be personally present during the arati or the special pujas of
Oh, really?
Kali Mata at the Kalighat temple in Kolkata. Later, I also found out that the bridge that connects Alipur with Kalighat, over the Tolinala, the Adi Ganga, that was actually basically, a makeshift wooden or bamboo bridge or bridge built on the boats, which was basically made into a Pakka bridge by Warren Hastings. So you can see the kind of support that the Hindus, thanks to the leaders like Raja Rammohan Roy and Raja Radhakant Dev, were able to garner from the Europeans, from the British administrators, which was impossible to conceive in the times of the Mughals or the Bengal Nawabs. So it was a radical political change of scenario in the cultural, religious situation and freedom of the Hindus. So I'm very grateful that you mentioned this point.
And Sujita, there is also the last point. And all this gave rise to the concept of middle class in the society. There was no middle class prior to the European invasion in India. There's no middle class. Either there was a rich and the poor. And after the reform movement's introduction of English by the 1850s, there was the birth of the middle class in the Indian society, of which we are the members till now. And last of all, as far as Bengal Front is concerned, neither we are against Commissioner Renu, nor we are against Singarafandu Chettiar, nor we can't be against Koparthi or Bunchi or Tilak in Maharashtra and anywhere. But at the same time, we are quite confident and proud of our glorious ancestors of the Bengal Renaissance. So if there's any assault on them, We are bound to resist, and we shall be on protest, and there shall not be any compromise to this. Learn it from us. And Sreejit, thank you very much for being with us. With your enormous experiences and profound knowledge, you have enriched us, and so also the audience. Whereas the audience has got its answers, and if you now like this telecast, please like it, please comment here and share with others, so that we are not set. We are already said we are not against anybody, but we are certainly for us, and that's the mantra for us. Thank you very much with us. Thank you, Sujit, for being with us.
Thank
Namaskar.
you.
Good night.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.